Hello and greetings. My name is Judah Kasuma. Today I will be discussing a book titled 1984 by George Orwell. I chose a, I chose this book 1984 by George Orwell because of the relevance it has till this day. Last year I was unlucky enough to not have the chance to read 1984. So this year when Mr. Hoover said we could choose a book to read and do a report on, I decided to do one about 1984 because of its relevance till this day in 2019. It discusses many broad topics that I heard many other people talk about, such as how the government is secretly watching us or listening to us, and how the government is manipulating media to manipulate its citizens. So I thought that I'd give 1984 a read for myself and really try and understand why it is so relevant in today's world. 1984 was written and published in 1949 by George Orwell, a pseudonym for Eric Blair, who was a contemporary political writer that sought to warn Westerners about the dangers of a totalitarian government that stemmed from his own horrific experiences in Russia and Spain of totalitarian governments. His main idea to create this utopian society in the book 1984 was to show readers that if no one took a stand to totalitarianism, that the future would become like the one he writes about in 1984. One of the main themes of the book is memory, and how the government constantly tries to dismiss people's memory and make it seem as it's too unreliable to be a factor at all, while at the same time, people like Winston, the main character of the book, work in the Ministry of Truth and spend their time editing newspapers, books, and other forms of media in order to make the government seem that they are never wrong and always trustworthy to the public. The government goes as far as erasing people from history who've committed crimes against the government, while also manipulating people's minds to think that whoever the country was at war with at the moment was the enemy who the government was always at war with, even though they've changed enemies a handful of times. Another main theme of 1984 is technology and how the government employed things like hidden microphones and telescreens throughout the city to monitor people, which isn't too different from our world now. The government does this to prevent any crimes against the government by psychologically manipulating people to think that someone is constantly watching, and is reflective of one of the most famous phrases that's written in the book, which is Big Brother is watching you. Another main theme of 1984 is love, and how from a young age the government represses any idea of love and sex by teaching children otherwise and introducing things like the Junior Anti-Sex League that seems like a privilege to join and be a part of. The main motive for INSOC, the ruling government of Britain at the time, to do this is to intentionally get people to have this pent-up sexual frustration and anger, and instead of putting that energy towards love and relationships, to put that energy towards nationalism and a love for the government that's available through events that's in the book, such as the 2 minute hates, where people gather up to a telescreen and are expected to throw complaints and boos and bad language towards Emmanuel Goldstein, a supposed traitor of the company, while also having a hate week where, in the same light, people are supposed to prepare things and really just show their hate towards Emmanuel Goldstein, a person who the government portrays as a traitor, while also during these events showing nationalist views and nationalist sentiments by supporting the government and hating the supposed criminals and traitors of the country, such as Goldstein. The final theme that I will be discussing is language. The government develops a new language called Newspeak that was supposed to replace English, or Old Speak as they call it in the book, in order to limit the ideas of rebellion and disdain towards the government by people communicating it. One of the reasons that this language is developed is to one day not even be able to describe schools of thought that disagreed with Insok's beliefs and to stop rebellious ideas before they can be communicated with other people. One of the most interesting quotes that I found while reading the book was on page 50, where Orwell writes, "You think, dare I say, that our chief job is inventing new words, but not a bit of it. We are destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them every day. We're cutting the language down to the bone." While people attribute the growth of a language to its growth in vocabulary, Newspeak follows Insect's political agenda to destroy words and limit the amount of ideas that can be communicated through words in order to stop any rebellion right at one's mind before it can even be communicated and talked about with other people. A parallel that I found between the book and in real life is the role of Big Brother as a character in the book and how he is the perceived savior and that he is someone who is very trustworthy and someone who is a symbol of nationalism of the country. And I found this similar to many communist leaders in history, in context of the book that came after the book's publishing, but who followed and fulfilled a similar role to Big Brother with people such as Ho Chi Minh in the Vietnam Revolution, how he was a big part of North Vietnam's success because of his strength as a leader, and how the stories around his name were great, and how people looked up to him in a very paternalistic view. And Kim Jong Un in North Korea right now in a totalitarian government, how uh, he tries to manipulate himself into being a perfect leader who is faultless and has never made any mistakes, and also to Vladimir Putin, who is seen and tried to be portrayed in media as a very caring leader who cares about Russia and all the people. Another idea that kept coming up throughout the book was Winston's idea of how revolution would be started in the proles, which is in the book described as the 85% of people who are not working for the government, but who are living daily lives. And in our words here would be like the peasants of a country, where by the government standards, they're not very important, and that they're just the rest of the people who are pretty irrelevant in the big picture. But Winston believes that, once again, that power rests in the pros, and that when the pros realize that they have the power to change things in the world, that one day they'll use that power and overturn the government. And this really reminded me of the case studies I learned in IB history in Vietnam and Zimbabwe, where one of the main factors of success in rebelling against the government, like each respective government, was the peasant support, and how while governments while the oppressive governments might not realize how important peasant supports were, the governments that overthrow the former governments saw the importance of peasant support and really tried to gain as much peasant support as they can, which is very similar to Winston's bright thinking. So overall, after reading 1984, I really enjoyed the book, and it's very good but scary at the same time how a lot of what George Orwell was writing about in 1949 really did came to true in 2019, and like the rise of communism in the 50s and 60s. And I think this is a very important book for our future generations also, because it just shows just how history is often repeated and often in a gyre, like we talked about with W.B. Yeats. And I feel like overall this book is very influential and contains a lot about many of the ideas that people have thought about and come up with in history. And I feel like this gives a good synopsis of like the history of the 1900s and the early 2000s, and just the many ideologies that have been born through that time period and that are still relevant till this day. So until next time, I'll see you later.